Young hackers mocked the old it guy until he stopped a cyberattack. They couldn't act. The headquarters of DataCore Systems occupied the top 5 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, where a tech company worth $3 billion operated in the careful balance between innovation and security. The Cybersecurity Operations Center on the 42nd floor was all modern efficiency. Wall-mounted displays showing network traffic in real time, workstations with multiple monitors, and the low hum of climate control keeping servers at optimal temperature. The morning shift briefing was in progress, led by Marcus Chen, the 32-year-old Chief Information Security Officer who'd been recruited from Google with a compensation package that could buy a small mansion. 20 security analysts sat around the conference table, average age 28, all carrying certifications in penetration testing and security operations, all confident in their mastery of modern cybersecurity tools. At the back of the room sat Robert Morrison, 67 years old, wearing khaki pants and a button-down shirt that was slightly wrinkled, his white hair cut short and practical. He was the Senior Systems Administrator, a title that sounded important, but functionally meant he maintained legacy systems and handled the unglamorous work that nobody else wanted. He'd been with DataCore since its founding 15 years ago, back when the company was 3 people in a garage, before the venture capital and the IPO and the glass tower. Marcus was presenting the week's security metrics, highlighting their impressive detection rates and rapid response times. Our new AI-powered threat detection system is performing at 97% accuracy. We're identifying and neutralizing threats faster than ever. Industry-leading numbers. One of the analysts, a 26-year-old named Devin, who'd earned his OSCP certification at 23, raised his hand. What about the legacy systems? The old infrastructure that's not integrated with the new security stack? Marcus glanced at Robert. That's Morrison's domain. Robert, you want to address that? Robert cleared his throat, speaking in a measured tone that suggested careful thought rather than uncertainty. The legacy systems are isolated, air-gapped from the main network. They run manufacturing control systems, some financial databases that predate the company's expansion. They're secure through isolation rather than active monitoring. But they're not integrated with our threat detection, Devin pressed. That's a blind spot? It's intentional architecture, Robert replied. Those systems don't need internet connectivity. They're physically separate. That's more secure than any software monitoring. Devin exchanged glances with another analyst, a slight smirk visible. That's very analog thinking. But in modern cybersecurity, everything should be monitored in real time. Air gaps are a false sense of security. Air gaps work when properly maintained, Robert said calmly. They've worked for decades in sensitive environments. Decades ago, sure, but modern attacks are sophisticated. They can jump air gaps through USB drives, firmware exploits, supply chain compromises. The only way to be secure is comprehensive monitoring and AI-driven detection. Devin's tone was respectful but condescending, the voice of someone explaining basic concepts to someone who couldn't keep up. Marcus intervened diplomatically. Both approaches have merit. Robert's experience with traditional security is valuable, and Devin's point about comprehensive monitoring is valid. Let's not turn this into a generational debate. But the damage was done. The younger analysts were now looking at Robert with the particular expression reserved for people who were past their prime but hadn't realized it yet. The old guy clinging to outdated methods, not understanding that the industry had moved on. After the briefing, as people filed out, Robert heard whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. How is Morrison still here? He doesn't even know Python. Legacy hire. Probably can't be fired because of tenure or something. He's like a living museum exhibit. This is what IT looked like in the 1990s. Robert gathered his notes and headed to his workspace. Not a modern standing desk in the open plan area where the young analysts worked, but a small office tucked away near the server room. The office held older equipment, reference manuals from different eras of computing, and a desktop computer running a custom Linux configuration that Robert had built himself. He sat down, logged in, and began his daily routine, checking the legacy systems, reviewing logs that nobody else bothered to examine, maintaining infrastructure that predated the company's modern architecture. Unglamorous work that the young analysts considered beneath them, work that didn't involve cutting-edge tools or impressive dashboards. But Robert knew something they didn't. The foundation mattered. The old systems, the legacy architecture, the outdated infrastructure, it all still ran, still processed critical operations, still held value that couldn't be replaced by flashy new technology. His phone rang. Marcus. Robert, can you come to my office? Of course. Marcus's office was modern minimalism. Glass walls, a sleek desk with nothing on it except a laptop and a phone, Herman Miller chair that cost more than Robert's monthly salary. Marcus gestured to a seat. Robert, I want to have an honest conversation about your role here. Robert sat, waiting. You've been with DataCore from the beginning. You built the initial infrastructure, kept things running through the growth years. I respect that. But the company has changed. We're enterprise scale now. We have sophisticated security requirements, and frankly, I'm getting pressure from the board about modernizing all our systems. The legacy systems are stable and secure, Robert said. I believe you, but they're also invisible to our modern security stack. Devin has a point. We have blind spots. And those blind spots make the board nervous. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not saying we're making changes immediately, but I need you to start thinking about migration paths, ways to bring those old systems into the modern architecture. That would require complete rebuilds. Those systems were designed for specific purposes with specific security models. Modernizing them means starting from scratch, which means months of development and testing, which means significant downtime for critical operations. I understand the challenges, but the alternative is, well, the board is talking about bringing in consultants, people who specialize in legacy system migration. And if we bring in consultants, your role becomes redundant. The implication was clear: modernize or be replaced. I'll start documenting migration options, Robert said quietly. I appreciate it. And Robert, I know the younger team members can be dismissive sometimes. I want you to know I value your experience. But you have to meet them halfway. Learn some of the modern tools, show that you can adapt. Otherwise, it's hard to justify your position when we have analysts who can do everything you do, plus work with the new security stack. Robert returned to his office, the conversation sitting heavy in his chest. He'd built this company's infrastructure from nothing, had worked 18-hour days during the early years, had sacrificed career opportunities at larger companies because he'd believed in DataCore's mission. And now he was being told to adapt or be replaced by people who thought cybersecurity began with their certifications and ended with their AI-powered dashboards. He pulled up his email, began reviewing the morning's routine notifications, system logs from the manufacturing control servers, automated reports from the financial databases, the mundane digital housekeeping that kept critical operations running. Then he saw it, a log entry that shouldn't exist. A network packet from one of the air-gapped systems, showing connection attempts to an external IP address. Robert went very still, his hands hovering over the keyboard. Air-gapped systems didn't connect to external addresses. That was the entire point of air-gapping. If this log was genuine, it meant someone had breached the isolation, had found a way to bridge the gap. He pulled up additional logs, cross-referencing timestamps, tracing the connection attempts. The pattern was subtle, small data packets, irregular intervals, designed to avoid detection. Someone sophisticated was probing the isolated systems, looking for vulnerabilities, testing responses. Robert's heart rate increased, not from panic, but from recognition. He'd seen this pattern before, not here at DataCore, but years ago, in a different context, in work he didn't talk about, because it was still classified decades later. He picked up his phone, called Marcus. We have a problem. Someone's trying to breach the legacy systems. What? How is that possible if they're air-gapped? That's what I need to figure out. But the logs show external connection attempts. Someone's inside our network already, and they're using that foothold to attack the isolated systems. I'll get the security team on it immediately. 10 minutes later, Robert's small office was crowded with young analysts, all staring at the logs on his screen, with expressions ranging from skepticism to concern. Devin was particularly vocal. This has to be a false positive. Air-gapped systems can't show external connections. That's definitionally impossible. Unless the air gap has been compromised, Robert said. How? You're the one who maintains these systems. If there's a breach, it's probably a configuration error on your end. Marcus held up a hand. Let's not assign blame yet. Robert, walk us through what you're seeing. Robert pointed to the log entries, explaining the pattern, the timing, the signature of the connection attempts. As he spoke, he watched the young analyst's expressions change, from dismissiveness to reluctant interest. Whatever they thought of his outdated methods, the data was undeniable. This looks like a APT pattern, said one analyst, Maya, who was more thoughtful than some of her colleagues. Advanced persistent threat, state-sponsored or highly sophisticated criminal organization. But how do they bridge the air gap? That's the question, Robert said. and I think I know where to look for answers. But I'll need access to the physical server room. Full access, not just my normal maintenance privileges. Devin scoffed. You think this is a physical breach? That someone snuck into our secure server room and plugged in a device? I think modern attacks use every vector available, Robert replied calmly, including old-fashioned physical access, supply chain compromises, insider threats, devices hidden in equipment deliveries. The air gap was solid when I built it. If it's compromised now, something physical has changed. Marcus made the call. Give him access. Robert, take whoever you need from the team. Find the breach point, but do it fast. If this is real, we're already under attack. Act 2. The server room was cold and loud, rows of racks holding equipment that kept DataCore's operations running. Robert moved methodically through the space, checking every connection, every device, every piece of hardware that touched the air-gapped systems. Devin and Maya followed, Devin still skeptical, Maya genuinely curious. What exactly are we looking for? Maya asked. Anything that shouldn't be here, Robert said. A device plugged into a USB port, a network cable running where it shouldn't, a piece of equipment that's been replaced or modified. He stopped at the rack holding the manufacturing control servers. These were older. Machines, 5-year-old hardware that didn't need cutting-edge specs because the software they ran was stable and purpose-built. Robert examined each connection, traced each cable, looked for anomalies. Then he found it. A small device, smaller than a pack of gum, plugged into an unused Ethernet port on one of the switches. It looked almost like part of the hardware, would have been invisible to casual inspection. But Robert's eyes, trained by decades of building and maintaining systems, recognized it as foreign. What is that? Devin asked, leaning closer. That, Robert said quietly, is how they bridge the air gap. It's a rogue device. Probably came in hidden in a legitimate equipment delivery, or installed by someone with physical access. It's creating a wireless bridge, connecting the isolated network to the main network through radio frequencies. That's impossible, Devin said. Our physical security would have caught it. We scan all deliveries, we have access logs for everyone who enters this room. Physical security has blind spots, Robert interrupted, still examining the device without touching it. Cleaning crews, maintenance vendors, deliveries of replacement equipment, any of those could have been vectors. And this device is sophisticated, probably military-grade hardware, designed to evade detection. Maya pulled out her phone, taking pictures. We need to call Marcus. If this is real, it's real, Robert said. And if I remove it, whoever's on the other end will know they've been discovered. We need to be strategic about this. Devin looked skeptical. Or it's a test device that you placed there yourself and forgot about. Maybe you're creating a crisis to prove your relevance. Robert turned to face him, and something in his expression made Devin step back. I spent 30 years in signals intelligence before coming to DataCore. I worked defensive cyber operations for organizations you don't know exist. I've seen attacks that never made the news because acknowledging them would reveal capabilities we didn't want revealed. This device is exactly what I say it is. A bridge device designed to compromise air-gapped systems. And the attack that's using it is already in progress. You were intelligence? Maya asked, surprise evident. I was a lot of things, but right now I'm the person who knows how to deal with this situation. So we can either argue about my credentials, or we can stop this attack before it causes serious damage. Devin pulled out his phone. I'm calling Marcus. This is above our pay grade. 15 minutes later, the conference room was packed. Marcus, the entire security team, the CTO, and even the CEO, Richard Paulson, who'd been called out of a board meeting. The rogue device was displayed on the screen via remote camera, and Robert was explaining what it meant. This is a hardware implant designed to bridge air gaps using wireless protocols. It's receiving commands from the main network, where the attackers have already established a foothold, and relaying them to the isolated systems. The goal is probably data exfiltration, stealing our manufacturing processes, financial records, anything proprietary stored on those legacy systems. How did this get past our security? Paulson demanded. Because security focused on network defense, Robert said. Firewalls, intrusion detection, the AI-powered threat monitoring system, all excellent tools, but they don't catch physical devices installed through supply chain compromise or insider access. Marcus looked sick. You warned us about this. In last quarter's security review, you mentioned physical security gaps. I dismissed it as... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, as outdated thinking. How do we stop it? The CTO asked. Robert pulled up a diagram showing the network architecture. The attackers have established command and control through the main network. They're using the bridge device to access the isolated systems. If we simply remove the device, they'll know they're discovered and will likely activate any remaining implants or trigger destructive payloads. We need to trace back through the attack chain, identify all compromise points, and neutralize them simultaneously. Can our security tools do that? Paulson asked. Not alone, Robert said. The AI-powered system is excellent at detecting known patterns, but this is a sophisticated multi-stage attack using techniques specifically designed to evade automated detection. We need human analysis, experience reading attacker behavior, understanding how state-sponsored groups operate. Devin spoke up, still defensive. Our team has that expertise. We can handle this. No offense, Robert said, meeting his eyes, but you've been trained on modern tools and contemporary threats. This attack is using techniques that predate your certifications, techniques I dealt with in the 1990s and 2000s when advanced persistent threats were emerging. I'm not saying you're not skilled, you are. But this specific situation requires experience you haven't had time to accumulate. Marcus made the decision. Robert takes lead. Everyone else supports. Devin, Maya, the rest of the team. You do exactly what Robert says. Clear? The room nodded, some reluctantly, others with visible relief that someone who seemed to understand the situation was taking charge. Robert pulled up a terminal, his fingers moving over the keyboard with practiced precision. The young analysts watched as he worked, not using point-and-click security tools, but command-line interfaces, raw log analysis, manual correlation of data across multiple systems. Old-school methodology that looked slow, but was actually far more precise than automated tools for this specific type of investigation. Here, Robert said after 20 minutes of focused analysis, the initial compromise. 3 weeks ago, a phishing email targeted our HR department. Someone clicked a malicious link, installed a remote access Trojan. That gave the attackers their foothold on the main network. From there, they did reconnaissance, identified the air-gapped systems, and arranged for the bridge device to be installed. How did they get the device in? Maya asked. Robert pulled up access logs. 5 days ago, a technician from our managed services provider came to replace a failed network switch. Standard maintenance, authorized access. Except the switch didn't actually fail. The work order was forged. The technician was an attacker who installed the bridge device while supposedly performing the repair. Jesus, Marcus breathed. We verified his credentials. He had the right ID, the right work order. Social engineering combined with technical sophistication, Robert said. This is a professional operation, probably state-sponsored, given the resources and planning involved. They've been inside our network for 3 weeks, mapping our systems, preparing for data exfiltration. We caught it early, but only because I was checking logs nobody else monitors. So what do we do? Paulson asked. Robert's hands moved over the keyboard, building a response strategy in real time. We create a honeypot, feed them false data through the compromised systems, make them think they're succeeding. Meanwhile, we isolate the real data, patch the vulnerabilities they're exploiting, and build a complete picture of their infrastructure. Then we coordinate with law enforcement and, given the state-sponsored nature, probably FBI Cyber Division, we neutralize the threat completely, not just treat the symptoms. How long will this take? The CTO asked. 48 hours for the honeypot and containment, another week for full remediation. But the immediate threat will be neutralized within hours if we execute properly. Devin spoke up, and for the first time, his tone wasn't dismissive. It was genuine curiosity. How do you know all this? The attack patterns, the response methodology? This isn't just theory. You've done this before. Robert looked at him steadily. Yes, I've done this before, in contexts I can't discuss, against adversaries I can't name, with stakes considerably higher than corporate data. That's why I recognize the pattern, and that's why I know how to stop it. For the next 18 hours, the security team worked under Robert's direction. He assigned tasks with precision, Devin handling data isolation, Maya coordinating with law enforcement, other analysts building the honeypot environment, everyone contributing their specific expertise under his overall strategy. The young analysts began to see what they'd missed before. Robert's outdated command line methodology was actually far more effective for this type of investigation than their point-and-click tools. His insistence on checking logs manually had caught the breach their AI systems missed. His understanding of physical security and supply chain compromise had identified the attack. Vector they'd considered impossible. As the containment operation progressed, Devin approached Robert during a brief break. I owe you an apology. I was dismissive, assumed your methods were obsolete. I was wrong. You weren't entirely wrong, Robert said. My methods are old, but old doesn't mean obsolete. It means proven. The fundamentals of security don't change. Attackers still need access, still leave traces, still follow patterns. Modern tools are excellent for modern threats, but sophisticated attackers study modern tools and design attacks to evade them. Sometimes you need to go back to basics. Where did you learn this? You said signals intelligence, but that's vague. Robert was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. I worked for NSA for 15 years, then DoD Cyber Command for another 15. I was part of the teams that developed some of the offensive and defensive capabilities that became industry standards. When I retired, I wanted simpler work, less responsibility. DataCore was supposed to be that. Maintain some old systems, help a small company grow, avoid the weight of national security operations. But you couldn't leave it behind completely, Maya said, joining them. No, the skills stay with you, the instincts, the understanding that every system is vulnerable if you know where to look, and that security is about layers, defense in depth, assuming breach and having contingencies. Robert looked at his hands, old hands scarred from years at keyboards, carrying weight these young analysts were just beginning to understand. I've seen what happens when security fails. Not corporate data breaches. Those are serious, but they're survivable. I've seen security failures that cost lives, critical infrastructure attacks, operations compromised, people in the field exposed. That's the weight I was trying to leave behind. But it came back, Devin said quietly. It always comes back, because the work matters, because someone has to understand how to defend against sophisticated threats, because the next generation needs to learn not just tools, but thinking, judgment, experience. The containment operation succeeded. By hour 36, the attackers' access was neutralized, their infrastructure mapped and reported to law enforcement. The false data feeding their systems, convincing them they'd succeeded, while the real data remained secure. By hour 48, the breach was completely remediated, new security measures implemented, and the company's systems hardened against similar attacks. The briefing to the board was Robert's, walking them through the attack, the response, the lessons learned. He spoke in clear, measured terms, never placing blame, always focusing on improvements. But everyone in the room understood what had happened. The old IT guy they'd been ready to retire had saved the company from a catastrophic breach that would have cost billions in intellectual property theft and reputational damage. After the briefing, Paulson pulled Robert aside. I want to offer you the Chief Security Officer position. Marcus is excellent, but you have experience and judgment we need at that level. Name your compensation. Robert shook his head. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want that role. Too much responsibility, too much weight. I'm happy maintaining systems, staying in the background. Then at least let us properly recognize what you did. A bonus, public acknowledgement, something. What I'd like, Robert said quietly, is for the team to understand that experience matters, that old methods have value, that security isn't just about the latest tools, but about understanding fundamentals, thinking like attackers, preparing for what automated systems can't catch. If they learn that, it's recognition enough. ACT3'd. The cost. 3 days after the containment operation, Robert was back in his small office, returning to routine maintenance work. But things had changed. The young analysts stopped by regularly now, asking questions, seeking advice, treating him with respect that had been absent before. Devin appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 coffees. Got a minute? Of course. Devin handed him 1 coffee, sat down. I wanted to talk to you about something. During the containment operation, you mentioned seeing what happens when security fails, that you'd seen failures that cost lives. Can you talk about that? Help me understand what we're really protecting? Robert sipped his coffee, considering how much to share. Most of what I did is still classified. I can't give you specifics, but I can tell you about weight. Weight? The burden you carry when your work has real consequences, when failure means more than data loss or financial damage, when people die because security wasn't good enough. Robert set down his coffee, his hands clasping together, an old gesture, grounding himself. There was an operation in 2003. I can't tell you where or what it involved, but I was part of the defensive cyber team protecting communications for people in the field. We had good security, multiple layers, redundant systems. We thought we were prepared. But someone got through, Devin said quietly. Someone got through. A sophisticated attacker. We later determined it was a state-sponsored group, found a vulnerability we'd missed. Not a technical flaw exactly, but a procedural gap. A single point where human error combined with technical timing could create a window of compromise. They exploited it perfectly. Robert's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone distant. The breach exposed communications data that revealed locations of personnel in the field. 6 people died in the follow-up attacks. 6 people whose families had to be told that their loved ones died because someone, somewhere, had failed to properly secure the systems. That wasn't your fault, Devin said. No security is perfect. Attackers only need to succeed once. Defenders need to succeed every time. I know the logic. I've told myself the same thing for 20 years. But logic doesn't change the weight. 6 names: Richardson, Patel, Okonkwo, Liu, Martinez, Johnson. I remember them all. I remember their faces from the memorial briefings, their ages, the families they left behind. I carry them every day. Is that why you left NSA? Maya asked, appearing in the doorway. Sorry, I heard part of this. Didn't mean to eavesdrop. Partly, Robert acknowledged. After that operation, after the review and the lessons learned and the new security measures, I couldn't carry the weight anymore. Every keystroke felt like it had life or death stakes. Every security decision felt like it could be the error that killed someone. I was effective but exhausted, burned out on the responsibility. So you came to corporate security, Maya said. Lower stakes. That was the theory. No lives at risk, just data and money, things that could be replaced. But even here, the work matters. This week proved that. If we hadn't caught that attack, DataCore could have been destroyed. Employees would have lost jobs, shareholders would have lost investments, customers would have been compromised. Different stakes, but still real consequences. Devin leaned forward. How do you live with it? The weight, the responsibility, the knowledge that what you do matters and failure has consequences? Robert looked at him directly. You compartmentalize. You focus on what you can control. You maintain discipline, follow procedures, build redundancy. You accept that perfect security doesn't exist, but prepare as if it might. And when failures happen, when despite your best efforts something breaks through, you learn from it, improve, and keep going. Because the alternative is giving up, and that's not an option when people depend on you. Is that what you were doing all these years? Maya asked. Maintaining the legacy systems, checking logs nobody else looked at, keeping the old infrastructure secure. You were carrying responsibility quietly, without recognition, because it needed doing. I was doing my job, Robert said simply. The same job I've done for 45 years in different contexts, protecting systems, defending against threats, carrying the weight so others don't have to. Marcus appeared at the door, his expression serious. Robert, can you come to the conference room? The FBI Cyber Division wants to debrief you on the attack. They have questions about the techniques used. As they walked to the conference room, Marcus spoke quietly. The FBI agent recognized your name, said you had a reputation in the intelligence community, called you one of the best defensive cyber operators of your generation. Why didn't you tell me about your background? Because it didn't seem relevant. I was hired to maintain systems, not trade on past credentials. It's relevant now. The board wants to restructure our security organization with you in a leadership role. I support it. You should be leading the team, not maintaining old servers in the background. I don't want leadership, Robert said. I want to do the work. There's a difference. In the conference room, 2 FBI agents were waiting. One young, one Robert's age. The older agent extended his hand with genuine respect. Robert Morrison, I heard you'd retired to the private sector. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Cyber Division. This is Agent Michael Torres. We need to understand the attack vector and methodology you identified. For 2 hours, Robert walked them through the technical details, the phishing compromise, the social engineering, the hardware implant, the bridge device, the command and control infrastructure. The agents took meticulous notes, asking precise questions that showed they understood the sophistication involved. This has signatures of APT-29, Agent Chen said finally. A Russian state-sponsored group. They've been targeting tech companies for intellectual property theft. Your manufacturing processes and financial records would be valuable to competing state-owned enterprises. That was my assessment, Robert agreed. How did you identify it so quickly? Most companies don't catch this kind of intrusion until months after initial compromise. You found it within 3 weeks before significant data loss occurred. I was looking in places automated systems don't monitor, checking logs manually, following instincts developed over decades of defensive operations. The young analysts here are excellent, but they rely heavily on tools. Tools are necessary but not sufficient against sophisticated adversaries. Agent Torres spoke up. Would you be willing to consult on other cases? We have several active investigations where your experience could be valuable. Not full-time, just occasional review of evidence and methodologies. Robert hesitated. I retired from intelligence work for a reason. I don't want to carry that weight anymore. I understand, Agent Chen said, But you're one of maybe 50 people in the country who have both the technical expertise and the operational experience to analyze state-sponsored attacks at this level. We're not asking you to come back full-time. Just help when we're facing something particularly sophisticated. Let me think about it. After the agents left, Marcus and Devin and Maya remained in the conference room. Marcus spoke first. Robert, I have to ask. You said you've been carrying weight for decades. From the NSA operation that went wrong, from other cases you can't discuss. Why keep doing this work? Why not actually retire, live quietly, stop carrying responsibility? Robert looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about the question, one he'd asked himself countless times over the years. Because the alternative is letting the weight win, deciding that because failures happened, because people died, I should stop trying to protect others. That feels like compound. Failure, not just the original incident, but abandoning the mission afterward. So you keep showing up, Maya said. Keep doing the work. Keep catching threats, keep carrying responsibility even when it's exhausting. Yes, because that's what you do when you understand the stakes. You don't stop because it's hard. You don't quit because the weight is heavy. You keep going because people depend on you, even if they don't know it, even if they don't appreciate it, even if they mock your outdated methods and question your relevance. Devin looked down at his hands. I'm sorry for all of it. The dismissiveness, the assumptions, the mockery. I didn't understand what I was looking at. Decades of experience, weight earned through failures and successes, knowledge that can't be learned from certifications. You didn't know, Robert said. And that's not criticism. You're young, you're skilled, you've learned what the industry teaches. But the industry doesn't teach everything. It doesn't teach what failure feels like, what weight does to you over decades, what it means to carry responsibility when stakes are high and recognition is low. Teach us, Maya said. Not just the technical skills, but the rest of it. How to think like you think. How to prepare for sophisticated threats. How to carry the weight without being crushed by it. Because eventually, people like you will retire, and people like us will be responsible for security. We need to be ready for that responsibility. Robert looked at the three faces watching him, young, earnest, beginning to understand that cybersecurity was about more than tools and certifications. All right, I'll teach you. But understand, this isn't a class you can finish. It's a lifetime of learning, adapting, carrying weight, accepting that you'll never know enough and failures will happen despite your best efforts. That's the reality of defensive work. We understand, Devin said, or at least we're beginning to. ACT 4. Over the following months, Robert's role at DataCore evolved. He remained the senior systems administrator officially, but functionally he became something else, a mentor, a teacher, a bridge between generations of cybersecurity practitioners. He established weekly training sessions for the security team, not teaching tools or certifications, but sharing experience. How to think like attackers, how to recognize patterns that automated systems missed, how to balance paranoia with practicality, how to carry responsibility for protecting systems that people depended on. The sessions were voluntary, held outside normal work hours, but every analyst attended. They'd seen what Robert could do when stakes were high, and they wanted to understand how decades of experience translated into instincts that had saved the company. Devin became Robert's informal apprentice, spending lunch hours in the small office learning not just techniques, but philosophy. In penetration testing training, they taught us to think like attackers, Devin said one afternoon. Find vulnerabilities, exploit them, prove systems are weak. But they didn't teach us what you're teaching, how to think 10 steps ahead, how to assume breach and plan for it, how to defend against sophisticated adversaries who are also thinking 10 steps ahead. That's because most training focuses on contemporary threats, Robert explained. Recent vulnerabilities, current exploit frameworks, today's attack tools. But sophisticated adversaries study the same material you study. They know what defenses modern security analysts will deploy because they went through the same training. To defend against them, you need to think beyond current best practices into fundamentals that don't change. Like the air gap breach, Devin said. Our modern tools would never have caught it because they're designed to monitor network traffic and endpoint behavior. They don't look at physical access logs or supply chain security or the possibility that someone would install a hardware implant. Exactly. The attack succeeded initially because it exploited assumptions, that physical security was adequate, that air gaps were unbreachable, that automated tools would catch everything significant. Those assumptions are common and usually valid, but sophisticated attackers identify and exploit exactly those assumptions. Maya joined the conversation, bringing coffee for all three of them, a ritual they'd established. Robert, can I ask about the NSA operation? The one where 6 people died? You said you've carried that weight for 20 years. Has teaching us, passing forward the knowledge, does that make it lighter? Robert thought carefully. It doesn't make the weight lighter. Richardson, Patel, Okonkwo, Liu, Martinez, Johnson, they're still there, still present. But it gives the weight purpose. If their deaths taught me lessons that I can pass forward to you, and those lessons help you avoid similar failures, then their sacrifice means something beyond just loss. That's why you stayed in security, Devin said. Despite the weight, despite wanting to walk away. Because walking away would mean their deaths were just loss, not lessons. Yes, and because someone has to carry the institutional memory. Someone has to remember that security failures have real consequences, that sophisticated adversaries exist, that complacency kills. If everyone in security is young and optimistic and confident in their tools, we're vulnerable. Experience, especially hard-won experience from failures, that's irreplaceable. Marcus stopped by the office, a routine he'd adopted to check in on the informal mentoring sessions. Robert, the board approved the security reorganization. We're creating a security architecture group focused on defense in depth, physical security integration, and threat intelligence. They want you to lead it. I already told you, I know you don't want leadership, but this isn't management, it's technical leadership, strategy, the kind of work you did for NSA and DoD, building defensive architecture, analyzing sophisticated threats, teaching the team. Devon and Maya would be your core team members. You'd have authority to implement the security measures you think necessary without worrying about budget or politics. Robert looked at Devon and Maya, saw the hope in their faces. What do you two think? Would you want to work in that structure? Absolutely, Devon said immediately. Learning from you these past months has taught me more than 2 years of formal training. If we could do that full-time, build security architecture using both modern tools and your experience, that would be incredible. Same, Maya added. You've shown us there's depth to this work beyond what we learned in school or certifications. We need that perspective. The industry needs that perspective. Robert felt something shift inside. Resistance to responsibility, meeting recognition that the responsibility mattered, that passing forward knowledge was its own form of service. All right, I'll do it, but with conditions. Name them, Marcus said. First, we maintain the legacy systems indefinitely. No migration projects until we've hardened the modern infrastructure to the same level of security. Second, we implement mandatory training for all security personnel on physical security, supply chain risk, and low-tech attack vectors. Third, we reduce reliance on automated tools and increase human analysis capacity. Tools are necessary, but not sufficient. Done, done, and done. Anything else? Yes. We create an incident review program where every security event, successful or failed, gets analyzed for lessons learned, and those lessons get documented and shared. No blame culture, just learning. Because that's how we get better, by studying our mistakes and making sure they teach us something. I'll have legal draft the policy. When can you start? I already started, 3 months ago when the attack happened. This just makes it official. The security reorganization took effect the following month. Robert's new team, Devon, Maya, and 4 other analysts who'd proven themselves during the attack response, began implementing comprehensive security improvements that combined modern tools with traditional defensive principles. They hardened the air-gapped systems, implemented better physical security monitoring, established supply chain verification protocols, and created response playbooks for sophisticated attacks. But more importantly, they built a culture that valued both contemporary techniques and historical lessons, that respected experience while embracing innovation. The FBI consulting request came back 6 weeks later. A major attack on critical infrastructure, sophisticated adversary, patterns that looked familiar. Robert agreed to review the evidence, spent a weekend analyzing logs and methodologies, and identified the attack chain that had eluded younger analysts. It's similar to the DataCore attack, he told Agent Chen on the phone. Hardware implants combined with sophisticated social engineering. The attackers compromised a managed service provider, used legitimate access to install rogue devices, and have been exfiltrating data for months. But there's a signature in the command and control protocol that's distinctive. I've seen it before. In classified operations I can't fully discuss. This is definitely AP-T29, and they're using evolved versions of techniques from the early 2000s. How do we stop it? Robert spent an hour walking her through containment strategies, drawing on 45 years of experience defending against sophisticated adversaries. When they finished, Agent Chen said something that caught him off guard. "Robert, you should know. There are a lot of young analysts at the Bureau who are good with tools, but lack the experience to handle state-sponsored threats. Would you consider teaching, not consulting on individual cases, but actual training for our cyber division? I'm already teaching at DataCore. I know, but the Bureau needs this expertise, so do other agencies. You're one of maybe a dozen people who have both the technical knowledge and the operational experience to teach defensive cyber at the highest level. It would be a few times a year, week-long sessions. Compensation would be appropriate to your expertise." Robert thought about Devin and Maya, about how much they'd grown in just a few months of mentoring, about Richardson, Patel, Okonkwo, Liu, Martinez, Johnson, the 6 names he carried, about whether teaching the next generation of defenders might give those deaths meaning beyond just loss. "Send me the details. I'll consider it." He took the teaching assignment. 4 times a year, he traveled to Quantico or other training facilities, teaching FBI and NSA and DoD cyber personnel about sophisticated threats, defensive architecture, thinking like adversaries. The students were young, smart, confident, just like Devin had been before, understanding there were depths to cybersecurity that certifications couldn't reach. Robert taught them those depths. He taught them about the NSA operation where 6 people died, about what happens when security fails, about carrying weight and continuing despite it. He taught them that perfect security was impossible, but preparation was essential, that sophisticated adversaries existed and required sophisticated defense, that tools were necessary, but judgment was irreplaceable. And he taught them about legacy, about standing on shoulders of people who'd come before, about learning from failures so they wouldn't be repeated, about passing forward knowledge so the next generation would be better prepared than the last. At 69, Robert Morrison was still maintaining systems at DataCore, but he was also teaching, consulting, building defensive architecture that combined 45 years of experience with contemporary tools and techniques. The small office near the server room had become a destination. Young analysts seeking advice, visitors from other companies wanting to learn from the man who'd stopped a state-sponsored attack. Devin had grown into a skilled defensive analyst, combining his technical knowledge with strategic thinking learned from Robert. Maya had become a threat intelligence specialist, tracking sophisticated adversaries and sharing insights across the industry. Both credited Robert with teaching them not just skills, but perspective, understanding that cybersecurity was about more than tools, that weight was real, that responsibility mattered. The 6 names Robert carried, Richardson, Patel, Okonkwo, Liu, Martinez, Johnson, they were still there, would always be there. But they were balanced now by other names: Devin, Maya, the dozens of analysts he'd taught at DataCore and Quantico, the security teams at other companies who'd learned from case studies of the attack he'd stopped. The weight remained, but it had purpose. It had meaning. It created legacy that extended beyond just personal burden into collective knowledge, shared wisdom, the understanding that failures could teach if someone was willing to carry the lessons forward. At 71, Robert Morrison finally retired from DataCore. His last day was quiet. No big ceremony, no company-wide announcements, just a small gathering of the security team, sharing stories and gratitude, acknowledging that they were losing not just an employee, but a teacher, a mentor, a living connection to decades of cybersecurity history. Devin gave a short speech. "When Robert started here, we mocked him, called him outdated, obsolete, a relic from a bygone era. We were wrong. He wasn't outdated, he was foundational. He represented knowledge we didn't know we needed until circumstances proved we needed it desperately. He taught us that security isn't just about the latest tools, but about fundamentals that don't change. He showed us what experience looks like, what carrying weight means, what responsibility requires. We're better analysts because of him. More importantly, we're better people." Maya presented him with a gift, a leather-bound journal containing letters from every member of the security team, describing what they'd learned, how he'd influenced them, gratitude for patience and teaching, and willingness to share hard-won knowledge. Robert read a few entries, his vision blurring with emotion he usually kept controlled. These young analysts he'd dismissed as overconfident had grown into thoughtful, skilled defenders who understood that security was about more than tools and certifications. "Thank you," Robert said simply, "for listening, for learning, for understanding that old methods have value. You're ready, you'll do well. And when you face sophisticated adversaries, when automated tools fail and you need judgment and experience, remember what I taught you. Think like attackers, prepare for the unexpected, carry the responsibility seriously, And when failures happen, because they will happen, learn from them. Let them teach you. Don't let weight crush you, but don't dismiss it either. Carry it forward with purpose. Robert Morrison left DataCore that evening, carrying a journal of gratitude and a lifetime of experience. He continued teaching FBI, NSA, private sector security teams, sharing knowledge that couldn't be found in certifications or learned from tools. He taught until 75, when age and accumulated injuries made travel difficult. By then, he trained hundreds of analysts, influenced security architecture at dozens of companies, helped stop multiple sophisticated attacks by teaching defenders how to think beyond automated tools. The 6 names he carried, Richardson, Patel, Okonkwo, Liu, Martinez, Johnson, they never left. But they were joined by other names now. The analysts he'd taught, the companies he'd helped secure, the attacks he'd helped stop. The weight remained, but it had been transformed from crushing burden into purposeful legacy. When Robert Morrison died at 79, the obituary was simple: cybersecurity pioneer, teacher, defender. But the people who'd known him, who'd learned from him, who'd been changed by his teaching, they understood the depth of what he'd been. A man who'd carried weight across decades, who'd turned failure into wisdom, who'd devoted his life to protecting others in the digital realm. A man who'd shown that experience mattered, that old methods had value, that security required not just tools, but judgment, intuition, the kind of deep understanding that only came from decades of defending against sophisticated threats. Devin and Maya organized a memorial gathering at DataCore. Hundreds attended, former colleagues, students, FBI agents, analysts from companies he'd consulted with. They shared stories about what Robert had taught them, how he'd influenced their work, gratitude for patience and dedication, and willingness to pass forward knowledge. And they committed to continuing his legacy, teaching the next generation, valuing experience alongside innovation, understanding that cybersecurity was about protecting people, not just systems, carrying responsibility seriously, learning from failures, and passing forward wisdom earned through decades of service. Robert Morrison's life proved that security required not just contemporary tools, but timeless principles. That experience accumulated over decades was irreplaceable. That teaching the next generation was the highest form of service. That weight carried with purpose created legacy, extending far beyond individual existence. His methods were old. His wisdom was timeless. His legacy lived on in every analyst who understood that defending systems meant defending people, that responsibility was real, that weight had meaning, and that some knowledge couldn't be automated or certified, only lived, learned, and carefully passed forward. End. For all who defend in silence and all who teach the next generation to carry the weight.